So before we get too far into February and all the admittedly really exciting games that are going to be coming down the pike very soon, first I did want to go over some of the games that I picked up for the deck in January. And while a lot of people are pumped to dive into a certain school of witchcraft and wizardry, I jumped into a very different type of school in February, starting off with Persona 3 Portable. Now I know I've mentioned this on the channel before, but this is not my first rodeo with Persona 3 Portable. I was about 20 or 30 hours into it back during the original release on the PSP, and through an unfortunate series of events lost all of my hard work and then let it slip into the backlog. But thankfully now in 2023 on the deck, I am able to dive fully back into that world of anime-styled supernatural intrigue. Persona 3 takes place in 2009 and drops your character into the Japanese city of Iwadadai, which was built and funded by the Kirijo Corporation. However, due to some bizarre experimentation, a concept known as the Dark Hour was inadvertently created, which is a period of time existing between one day and the next where most people are turned into coffins, but are completely unaware of this. However, some people are aware of this phenomenon, and you are one of those people. And during this Dark Hour, the school you attend, Gekukan High, becomes a towering labyrinth called Tartarus, which is filled with enemies that prey on the minds of anyone still awake during this period. As a new transfer student and true to the formula, you'll be joining up with a ragtag group of other high schoolers to investigate this phenomenon during the Dark Hour each night, while balancing your life as a high schooler and expanding on those relationships during the day. And it's not just that the story changes depending on how you develop these relationships, but mechanically the personas you summon for battle get stronger based on the bonds you form with them. That probably sounds like a lot to take in, and admittedly it kind of is. But the thing I've always loved about Persona is just how manageable it makes these back and forth periods of exploration combat and high school slice of life simulation. Because you're taking things one day at a time, normally in bite-sized chunks, I've always found Persona games to be ideal for portable pick-up and play sessions where you want to squeeze in just a little bit of progression, and it's easy to put the game to sleep quickly if needed. And that's exactly why, despite having a copy of Persona 3 Fez for the PS2, I really wanted to play Persona 3 on a portable like I did for Persona 4 when I beat it a few years back. Now I suppose I could have just emulated the PSP or PS2 version on the deck, or just straight up play the physical copy I have not opened yet for the PSP, but when I heard this was getting ported this year anyways, I figured I could wait it out, and I really did want to have a copy of this in my Steam library. And now, thanks to it being natively available on Steam, I can do exactly that, and once again dive into a slickly stylized anime world that is rife with tightly designed RPG combat, colorful characters, and intriguing high school drama. Next up is a game that only really existed on the periphery for me, and I'd heard it mentioned here and there, but it wasn't until a recent comment from Colin Allen reminded me of this game that I decided to go ahead and take the leap on it, and that is Bright Memory Infinite. Knowing very little about this game aside from the super fun first-person shooter combat I was subjected to after firing it up, I had to do a little bit of research here. Apparently it was originally created as Bright Memory Episode 1, but then rather than creating Episode 2, the game was remade and expanded into a full-length title called Bright Memory Infinite. And it's crazy to me that this game was created by a single developer in their spare time. In Bright Memory Infinite, you'll play as Sheila, and you've been tasked by the Science Research Organization to prevent a military organization from getting its hand on some ancient power that can reawaken the dead. It's set in a place called the Land of the Sky above the Arctic, which is a range of levitating landmasses that host ancient creatures. But I gotta be honest, while that all sounds well and good, the thing that really grabbed me most about this game was just how good the combat felt. I mean, it's not Doom Eternal levels of visceral or anything, but the feel of blasting enemies after some up-close melee action sure hits hard. I'm still pretty early in the game, but from a production value standpoint, the game's quite a looker. I mean, it's definitely not AAA levels of quality, but maybe AA if that's technically a thing. And again, that's really impressive considering this was made by just one guy. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely some jank here in the form of graphical glitches and some so-so voice acting, but it's just engaging enough that I definitely want to play more. Of course, fast and frenetic as it is, you'll definitely need to tinker with the graphic settings for a good experience on the deck. The default setting had frame rates all over the place, but after I toned things down like particle effects and motion blur and dropped the render distance I think down to like 75% or 90%, it was a much smoother experience and stayed closer to 60 FPS on the deck. Still dips here and there, but certainly playable. Which is great because I'm expecting to have a lot of fun with this one moving forward, so Colin, if you're watching, thanks again for the heads up. Next up is a game that was a complete impulse purchase on my part, and I got it mostly because it looked like a nice way to chill out between more demanding titles, and that is Lonely Mountains Downhill. It's a mountain biking game where the goal is to finish each track, but it takes place from a fixed camera angle as you follow your character down the mountain. Where Bright Memory Infinite captured my attention thanks to gameplay, Lonely Mountains Downhill caught my eye thanks to its distinctly geometric presentation. It just looks really playful, and its solid use of a depth of field effect gives everything a dreamy sort of look. But more than just the presentation, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was scratching some itch I didn't know I had. Something about this game kept gnawing at me as I struggled to remember exactly why something felt so familiar about it. And then it hit me sort of like a Ratatouille remembrance moment. It reminded me of Ski Free, that old game that I believe was included with Windows 95 or maybe Windows 3.1, where you just guide your skier down a mountain and try to survive, and then eventually the abominable snowman will just come and eat you. Anyways, it's both relaxing and kind of difficult depending on whether you're trying to get down the mountain alive, or if you're just trying to wrap up challenges like finishing in a particular time or under a certain amount of crashes. In a bid to try to unlock the next course, I barely squeaked by with 19 bailouts when the limit was 21, but I have to say it was an enjoyable experience. I don't know if I'd play it in any sort of completionist way, but rather just as a chill game to relax with, considering the only sound in the game are the serene sounds of nature like rushing water, or wind, or nearby birds. Well, rather it's serene until you crash, because after that it's a pretty grotesque, crunchy sort of sound. But that aside, it does seem like it can be a pretty relaxing time. And given its simplicity, it shouldn't be surprising that holding a steady 60 frames per second was not an issue at all in my playtime with it. Now next up is a game that I thought would be one that I would just want to chill out with, like a light puzzle game, but it actually ended up being a lot more difficult than I thought, and I, have no shame in admitting that I had to go looking around online to find some clues on how to progress, but that game is Superliminal. Now I feel like this is going to be a pretty boring comparison to make, but I'm gonna because it's not hard to draw parallels between Superliminal and Portal. Except instead of a portal gun and a laboratory, you can swap in the powers of your own mind as you try to escape from a dream. The puzzles involve escaping various rooms to find the exit and involve a lot of forced perspective work to sort out how to get to the next point in the story. For example, if you pick up a small block and hold it at the right angle and release it, it becomes ginormous. It's all a little bit mind-bending, but so far I'm giving it high marks for an interesting premise, and some truly head-scratching gameplay that, again, has sort of left me scouring the internet to look for clues because I've gotten stuck more than a few times. Thankfully it's not too taxing on the deck, and I didn't have any issues keeping a consistent frame rate so far, and it looks pretty good, if not a bit simple stylistically. And finally, the last game on this list that I picked up that I was super excited to play because I had seen trailers for it about a year ago, and it is decidedly not a chill game, is Choo Choo Charles. Choo Choo Charles is a game about an evil train with spider legs that hunts you in the dead of night through the woods on a remote island. That already sounds incredible, but on top of just trying to survive, you'll also have an old train of your own to run around in, complete with a gunner turret to fight Charles back as he relentlessly pursues you. However, periodically along the way, you'll also have to switch the tracks depending on where you want to go on the map, meaning you have to leave the relative safety of your own train in order to make sure that you can hit any of the quest givers along the way, or scoop up any scrap that you might find out in the open world, which is useful for upgrading your train, and ultimately making sure that you have the armor and firepower necessary to keep Charles at bay as he keeps chasing you. Along the way, you'll meet a variety of NPCs who have quests for you that will reward you with lots of scrap, so you can upgrade your train or repair it more efficiently. It's completely ridiculous and over the top, and in my brief time with it so far, I am absolutely loving this, because it's precisely the sort of B-movie horror camp that I tend to gravitate to. But when I say that, I don't mean to say that the gameplay is deficient in Choo Choo Charles, because it isn't. It's actually really smartly designed on the horror front, because you're not just managing your own survival, but also your train's survival. Thankfully, every time you die to Charles, you don't lose all of your scrap, but you will lose some of it, which is deterrent enough not to get gobbled up by a demon train while you're out scavenging the landscape. Now, I could probably go on at length about all of the things that I love about Choo Choo Charles so far, but honestly, it's probably going to warrant its own video at some point, so for now I'll just say that ever since I saw the trailer for this game last year, I was excited to try it, and that excitement was not unfounded. Now, this is an early access game, and to be honest, deck performance isn't the best without scaling the graphics back pretty significantly, but I'm still having a blast with it, and considering it's only a 3 to 5 hour adventure, I expect I'm gonna have a great time finishing this one. I did not ever imagine that I would be making a video whereby I mentioned a spider-legged demon train, but here we are. Alright, and that's it for this one. Those were just some of the highlights of games that I picked up in January that I'm having a really good time with so far. But hey, what about you? Did you get anything super great in January? If so, I would love to hear about it, particularly if it's for the Steam Deck. As always, thank you so much for your time. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.